A lot going on in the nation's capital. Here to help us break it all down is Representative Buddy Carter, the congressman proudly serving Georgia's 1st District. So, Congressman, I appreciate you coming on tonight because there's a lot going on in the nation's capital. But I do want to start with something that the president tweeted this morning, saying that perhaps we should, he raised the suggestion, I'll put it that way. He didn't make a definitive statement, raising the possibility of delaying the election. Of course, that is something that would need congressional approval. What do you think of that type of move?
Well, I think what the president was essentially trying to do was draw attention to what is truly a problem. I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, a good friend of mine out in California, a colleague, he was declared the winner of the election that night by AP. Yet through ballot harvesting, through the mail-in ballots, 2 days later, he loses the race. Now, how does that happen? That should not happen. That was criminal what happened there. And I think what the president is trying to say here is that we got to be very careful about this mail-in balloting, and we do have to be very careful. You're right. I don't think we're going to be able to delay the election. The Constitution won't allow that. But I do think that we can do some things to prepare for this and to help us, particularly during this COVID pandemic, making sure that we've got larger facilities, larger voting places where people can space correctly and properly as they should be, and making sure maybe we open the polls longer, maybe we extend the hours, whatever it takes, but we need to make sure that in-person voting is certainly optional and certainly available to people.
And that's something that I hear from a lot of your colleagues throughout the day, saying that very same point, essentially that the whole premise of that tweet, or the underlying understanding of it, is that we shouldn't be making drastic changes in a very crucial election year, in what perhaps one of the most nation-defining elections that we've seen for several decades. So maybe we should hold off on any of those transformative type of reforms. But we did hear President Barack Obama this morning during his eulogy say that that is on the agenda for Democrats if they were to be in power once again, saying they should do away with the filibuster, they should get these voting reforms through. So that is on the horizon for, I think, a lot of people if Democrats do take back the Senate. I think that's something to keep an eye on. But when we're focusing on what's happening right now in the lower chamber, the big focus is on the coronavirus relief bill. The Senate has their bill. Democrats have their proposal. Do you think that they'll be able to consolidate those two proposals?
Well, I think that's up to Speaker Pelosi and to Chuck Schumer. They are the ones who are not coming to the negotiating table. And look, there's a big difference in $1 trillion and $3.5 trillion. I, for one, am one who would rather us just see how the first $3 trillion that we spent with the first 3.5 packages, how the impact that has before we go adding to it. However, I understand if there are needs for more testing, for more healthcare needs, then certainly I want to look at it. And certainly I'm willing to look at what Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership in the Senate have proposed. Yes, I want to look at that, but I'm not interested in adding a whole lot more debt to what has already grown into an unfathomable amount of debt for our country.
And even in that first bill that you're talking about, there's still a lot of money that hasn't been spent by a lot of these states. There are a lot of the recipients that got that money as well. And this comes at a time, too, where we're starting to reopen the country. So a lot of people are saying that maybe it's the wait and see approach that we should be taking before we just start dishing out even more money. Because to your point, $1 trillion is still a lot of money, let alone whatever ends up being negotiated between the two chambers, because something tells me it's not going to end at just $1 trillion. Is that the mindset that you think that we should be carrying into this negotiation?
Absolutely. Let me tell you, I subscribe to that theory, and I will tell you that when I voted on the first 3.5 packages, I voted yes for all of them, and if I had to do it over again, I'd still vote yes. They were needed. I understand that, and I acknowledge that. However, that's the first time I've ever voted for a bill that had a T behind the dollar mark, and I will tell you that's a lot of money, and it's certainly something we need to be concerned with. There's already $1 trillion that hasn't gone out of that first $3 trillion. So we don't even know the impact that that's going to have yet. So, you know, let's just slow down a little bit and see what we truly need. Again, if it's health care, I understand. I acknowledge that we need to look at that and consider it. But we just need to be careful here.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up an interesting point too, and it's the idea that nobody wants to be the one to necessarily put their foot down and say we're not going to give out $1,200 stimulus checks. I understand why that's not a politically favorable thing to do, but I understand that it's more of the ideological principle behind it sometimes. You can't just be paying people to essentially have their support during an election year. That's something that's not sustainable, and you can't just be dishing out trillions of dollars the same way that the unemployment, some would say, that right now is incentivizing people to stay off work. It's kind of prolonging, if you will, the recovery that we're seeing right now if people can't go back to work, can't go back to school, anything of that nature.
No question about it. And look at the state of Georgia, where I'm from, with the extra $600 a week, most people are making like $20.50 an hour. I mean, you know, if you can make that sitting at home, why do you want to go back to work?
Right. And that's exactly what's in the Republican bill, if I'm not mistaken. It's about 70% of what the individual was making beforehand compared to right now, where it's more money than that individual was making when they were actually employed. And there's also funds, too, that are tied to the reopening of schools. That is something that Republicans want to put in their bill as well, saying that that federal money can go there so long as there's at least an effort to get kids physically in the classroom. Do you think that's the right approach as well, kind of putting them on there with incentives?
Oh, no question about it. Listen, we're never going to get our economy going again until we get our schools open, until we get our daycares open, because our workers won't be able to be there. But it is putting tremendous stress on our parents as well. I have grandchildren, and my son, I've been talking to him all morning long about getting our children back in school. He's concerned about them missing valuable time in the classroom, as he should be. And I think most parents are concerned about this. We know that this virus doesn't impact children. Yes, they could be carriers of it. We're uncertain exactly how that works yet, but there's no question about it. We need to get our kids back in school. We need to have them not missing the valuable time in the classroom that they're missing right now.
And it goes beyond education, too. I mean, we talk about how for some kids, their first meal of the day is that school lunch or whatever they receive at school, or the opportunity for those kids to be at school for 8 hours a day or whatever it may be allows a parent then to go work and get their business back and running again. There are so many different facets that are left out of this conversation. It's not necessarily just public health versus the economy. And I think that is something that the American people can see because they're the ones experiencing these hardships firsthand. But sometimes when we're having the conversation in the media, it's something that gets overlooked a lot of the time. But Representative Buddy Carter, I appreciate you coming on and breaking down the status of where we are with that legislation. Thank you.
Thank you.